The ship broke apart like glass in the darkness of space. Captain Park had only seconds to react when the asteroid tore through the cargo bay. Alarms screamed. Red lights flashed everywhere. The gentle dawn was dying around her, and she knew there was no saving it. She ran through the burning hallways, smoke filling her lungs, heat pressing against her skin. The escape pod was her only chance. Behind her, the ship groaned like a wounded animal. Metal twisted. Walls collapsed. Fire ate everything it touched. Threw herself into the escape pod and slammed the launch button. The small vessel shot away from the dying freighter just as the main reactor exploded. Through the tiny window, she watched her ship become a ball of orange fire, then nothing but floating debris. The pod's computer calculated the nearest planet, Prime, a forest moon in the Outer Rim territories, had heard stories about this place. Bad stories. The lived here and the were not kind to strangers. She had no choice. The pod was already falling toward the moon's surface. The landing was violent. Trees snapped like twigs as the pod crashed through the forest canopy, hit her head against the console, and everything went black for a while. When she woke up, blood was running down her face, and the pod was filling with smoke from damaged circuits. She grabbed what she could from the emergency supplies, a med kit with basic bandages and medicine, food rations meant to last one person 2 weeks, a small knife, a fire starter, a thermal blanket. It was not much, but it was something. Outside, the forest was dark and thick. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than houses, their branches blocking out most of the sky. Strange sounds came from every direction. Animals she could not see made noises she did not recognize. The air was heavy and wet, like breathing through a warm cloth. Found a spot between 2 large roots and built a small shelter using branches and the thermal blanket. Her hands shook as she worked. She was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her life. But fear would not keep her alive. Only action would. The first night was the longest. She did not sleep. Every sound made her heart jump. Every shadow looked like a monster. She held her small knife in both hands and waited for something to kill her. Nothing came. The second day, she explored the area around her crash site. She found a stream with clean water. She found some plants that looked safe to eat, though she was too afraid to try them. She set up the emergency beacon on the pod, hoping someone would hear the signal, hoping someone would come. The second night, she heard something different, not the sounds of animals hunting, something smaller, something sad. Whimpering. Held very still. The sound came from somewhere to her left, maybe 50 meters away. It was soft and broken, like a child crying but trying to stay quiet, like something small that was hurt and scared and alone. She should have stayed hidden. She knew this. They were dangerous. If adults found her anywhere near their young, they would tear her apart without asking questions. This was their world, and she was nothing but an invader. But the crying continued, and could not ignore it. She moved through the darkness slowly, carefully, following the sound. The forest floor was soft under her feet. The massive trees blocked the moonlight, making everything shadow. She used her small flashlight sparingly, afraid of attracting attention. She found them in a hollow beneath a fallen tree. 3 cubs huddled together in the dirt. They were about the size of large dogs, covered in gray fur that was matted with blood. Their eyes glowed amber in the flashlight beam, wide with fear. One of them growled weakly at her. Another tried to stand but collapsed. The third just stared at her, too exhausted to react. They had been attacked. Deep claw marks covered their small bodies. Something had tried to kill them and they had barely escaped. Their mother was nowhere to be seen. Stood there for a long moment, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She thought about walking away. She thought about returning to her shelter and pretending she had never found them. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. She could feel the pressure changing in the air, could smell the rain approaching. These cubs were injured and weak. Without shelter, without warmth, they would not survive the night. She thought about her grandmother back on Earth. Her grandmother who had survived war and famine and loss, who had raised 7 children in a house with no heat, who had told young that the measure of a person was not what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it was hard. "You are going to get me killed," whispered to the cubs. Then she knelt down and reached out her hand. The cubs flinched. The one who had growled showed its small teeth, trying to look dangerous. But they were just bobbies, hurt and scared, and they had no fight left in them. Moved slowly. She let them smell her hand. She spoke softly, using the same gentle voice she used with frightened animals back home. She did not know if they could understand her words, but she hoped they could understand her tone. "It is okay," she said. "I am not going to hurt you, I am going to help." The smallest cub moved first. It crawled toward her, sniffing her fingers, then pressed its head against her palm. Its fur was soft despite the blood and dirt. It made a small sound, almost like a sigh, and closed its eyes. The other 2 watched, then slowly they came closer too. Picked up the smallest one first. It weighed almost nothing. She could feel its ribs through its fur, could feel how weak it was. She tucked it inside her jacket against her chest, where it could feel her heartbeat. Getting all 3 back to her shelter took almost an hour. They were heavy together and the forest was dark, and the storm was getting closer. Rain started to fall when she was halfway there, cold and hard, soaking through her clothes. But she made it. She brought the cubs inside her small shelter and wrapped them in the thermal blanket. She cleaned their wounds with supplies from the med kit. She gave them water from her canteen. She opened one of her precious food rations and fed them small pieces by hand. Outside, the storm screamed. Lightning cracked across the sky. Rain pounded against the shelter like fists. Inside, 3 cubs fell asleep against a human woman who should have been their enemy. Watch them breathe. Their small chests rose and fell. Their paws twitched as they dreamed. They looked peaceful for the first time since she had found them. She was exhausted. She was scared. She had probably just signed her own death sentence. But right now, in this moment, 3 small lives were safe because she had chosen to act. Her grandmother would have been proud. The storm lasted 3 days. Named the cubs on the first morning. She did not know their real names, so she gave them names based on what she saw. The biggest one, who had tried to growl at her, who still watched her with suspicious eyes, she called Brave One. The middle one, who was curious about everything, who kept sniffing her belongings and poking at her equipment, she called Little One. The smallest, who only wanted to sleep against her warmth, she called Sleepy One. Later she would learn their true names were, but for now they were her Brave One, her Little One, and her Sleepy One. Feeding them was hard. Her rations were meant for 1 human for 2 weeks. 3 growing cubs ate more than she expected. By the second day, she was giving them most of the food and keeping only small amounts for herself. Her stomach hurt with hunger, but she ignored it. The cubs needed the food more than she did. She cleaned their wounds twice a day. The cuts were healing well, those injuries were deeper than the others. Used all of her antibiotics on the cubs, saving nothing for herself. If she got sick or hurt, she would deal with it later. Right now, keeping these 3 alive was all that mattered. The shelter was small, barely big enough for 1 person. With 3 cubs inside, there was no room to move. Spent most of her time pressed against the wall, with cubs piled on top of her, around her, against her. They were warm, at least. Their body heat kept the cold away. The smallest one bonded with her fastest. He followed her everywhere, even when she just moved from one side of the shelter to the other. He cried when she was not touching him. He slept with his head on her lap, his small paws wrapped around her arm. He had nightmares, whimpering in his sleep, and would stroke his fur and hum old songs until he calmed down. Was different. He was curious and fearless, always wanting to explore. He chewed on her flashlight. He tried to eat her emergency beacon. He escaped the shelter twice during the storm and had to run into the rain to bring him back. He was trouble, but he made her laugh, and laughter was something she badly needed. Took the longest to trust her. She was the oldest of the three, the most aware of what was an outsider, a different species, a potential threat, watched with careful eyes, always ready to fight, always on guard. But slowly, day by day, her suspicion faded. When cleaned her wounds, stopped flinching. When offered food, stopped growling. By the third day, allowed to scratch behind her ears and made a deep rumbling sound that might have been a purr. On the second night, something came to their shelter. Heard it first, heavy footsteps in the mud, breathing, the sound of something big moving through the storm. The cubs heard it too. They went silent and still, pressing against, trembling. The creature was large. Through a gap in the shelter, could see its shape moving in the rain. It walked on four legs, had a body covered in dark scales and a head full of teeth. It was hunting. It was following a scent. Their scent. Understood then. This was what had attacked the cubs. This was what had probably killed their mother. And now it had found them again. The cubs were too weak to run. The storm was too strong to escape through. There was only one choice. Grabbed the largest branch she could find and stepped out of the shelter. The creature turned toward her. Its eyes were black and empty. Rain ran down its scales. It opened its mouth and showed rows of sharp teeth, each one as long as her finger. Was terrified. Her legs wanted to run. Her hands wanted to drop the branch. Every part of her body screamed that she was going to die, that she should flee, that fighting this thing was madness. But behind her, three cubs huddled in a tiny shelter, depending on her to protect them. She screamed and swung the branch at the creature's head. The fight was short and brutal. The creature was stronger, faster, more deadly. It knocked down twice. It clawed her arm, leaving deep scratches that bled freely. It bit at her leg, tearing through her pants and into her skin. But kept fighting. She hit the creature in the eye. She jammed the branch into its mouth when it tried to bite her throat. She kicked and punched and refused to stop, even when her body was broken and bleeding. Finally, the creature decided she was not worth the trouble. It backed away, hissing at her, then disappeared into the storm. Collapsed in the mud. Rain washed the blood from her wounds. Everything hurt. She could barely move. But she had won. She crawled back to the shelter. The cubs were waiting for her, whining with worry, licked her face, pressed against her wounded arm, trying to comfort her. Even, suspicious, curled up at her feet and refused to move. That night did not sleep. She stayed awake, watching the entrance, ready to fight again if needed. Her wounds ached. Fever started to build in her body. She used the last of her clean bandages on herself, knowing it might not be enough. But the cubs slept. All three of them piled around her, safe and warm and alive. On the third day, the storm finally ended. The sun came out, weak and pale through the thick clouds. The forest dripped with water. Everything smelled clean and new. Stepped outside for the first time in days. Her body was weak from hunger and injury. Her clothes were torn and stained with blood. She looked terrible, felt worse. But she was alive. The cubs were alive, and somewhere out there, rescue might be coming. She checked the emergency beacon. It was still working, still sending its signal into space. Someone would hear it eventually. Someone would come. Until then, she would keep fighting. Joined her outside, sniffing at the wet ground, excited to explore. Stayed close to her legs, unwilling to be far from his new protector. Even emerged, blinking in the sunlight, looking at the world with new eyes. Looked down at the three cubs who had become her responsibility. They looked up at her with complete trust. "Well," she said quietly, "I guess we are a family now." Barked happily, wagged his tail, made that deep purring sound again. Smiled despite everything. They would survive this together. On the fourth day, the warriors came. Heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps, many of them, moving through the forest with purpose. The sound of branches breaking. deep voices speaking in a language she did not understand. The cubs heard them too, but instead of hiding, they reacted differently. Ears went up, made a sharp barking sound, started bouncing with excitement. They recognized those sounds. Those were their people. Felt her heart turn cold. This was what she had feared from the beginning. The adult had found them. She thought about running. She thought about hiding, but she was too weak from her injuries and from days without proper food. And even if she could run, she would not leave the cubs behind. They were hers now in a way she could not explain. She had bled for them. She had starved for them. She would not abandon them. So she sat down at the entrance of her shelter, placed all 3 cubs in her lap, and waited for death to find her. They emerged from the tree line like ghosts. There were 12 of them at first, tall and terrible, covered in gray fur, their amber eyes glowing even in daylight. They wore armor made of dark metal. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. Every single one of them was bigger than any creature had ever seen. At their front was the largest of all, a female nearly 8 feet tall with scars covering her face and arms. One of her ears was torn. Part of her lip was missing, showing teeth that could bite through steel. She moved like a predator, smooth and deadly, and her eyes locked onto with killing intent. This was Commander, leader of the elite guard, the most feared military force in 3-star systems. Did not know this yet. All she knew was that death had arrived, and it was wearing armor. Raised one massive hand. The warriors behind her spread out, surrounding the shelter, blocking any escape. Their weapons pointed at 12 killing machines, ready to end one small human life. The cubs felt the tension. They knew something was wrong, pressed closer to, whimpering. Stood in front of her, hackles raised, confused about why the adult seemed angry. And brave little did something that changed everything. He stood up on his small legs. He walked forward until he was between and the warriors. He looked up at Commander, at the weapons, at the killing intent in their eyes. And he bared his teeth at his own people. He growled at them. This tiny cub, barely able to walk without stumbling, growled at 12 of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. He planted his paws and refused to move. He was protecting the same way had protected him. The warriors stopped. Their weapons lowered slightly, even seemed frozen, staring at the cub with something like shock. A long moment passed. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She looked past her soldiers, and she really saw what was in front of her. A human woman, small and soft and weak by standards. Her clothes were torn and bloody. Her body was thin from hunger. Fresh wounds covered her arms and legs, wounds that came from protecting the cubs from predators. She looked like she had not slept in days. She looked like she had given everything she had, every bit of strength, every bit of food, every bit of herself, to keep 3 children alive. And those children, the cubs of fallen pack sister, were not afraid of this human. They were not trying to escape from her. They were protecting her. They had chosen her as one of their own. In culture, there was no bond stronger than the pack debt. When someone saved your life, you owed them everything. Your loyalty, your protection, your blood. This debt passed through generations. It could never be fully repaid. This human had saved 3 cubs who belonged to the elite guard's pack. She had given them food when she was starving. She had fought for them when she was weak. She had stayed awake for days to guard them while they slept. She had earned a debt that could never repay. The commander lowered her weapon slowly. Then, to the shock of every warrior present, she knelt. Her massive body folded down until she was at eye level with the small human woman. Her face, which had never shown anything but anger and contempt, softened into something close to respect. "You saved our cubs," said. Her voice was deep and rough, but there was no threat in it now. "You saved the children of my fallen sister." Did not know how to respond. She was too exhausted, too scared, too confused. She just held the cubs and waited for whatever came next. "In our culture, this creates a debt," continued. A pack debt. It means you are no longer a stranger to us. You are pack. You are family. What you need, we provide. What you ask, we give. This is our law. This is our way. The other warriors exchanged glances. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to be nothing. But their law was clear. The debt was real. One by one, the warriors knelt as well. Looked at the circle of deadly aliens kneeling before her. She looked at the cubs in her lap, at who had defended her, at who had finally learned to trust her, at who loved her without question. She was so tired. Days without sleep, days without proper food, days of fear and pain and desperate survival. Her body had nothing left to give. "What do you want from us, human?" asked. "Name your request. Anything within our power we will provide." Thought about asking for food. She thought about asking for medical care. She thought about asking for a way home, for a ship, for rescue. Instead, she said the only thing her exhausted mind could form into words. "I just want to sleep, please. I am so tired." Stared at her for a long moment. Then something happened that none of her warriors had ever seen before. Commander Terror of the Outer Rim, Conqueror of Worlds, laughed. It was a short laugh, more surprise than humor, but it was real. This tiny human, surrounded by enemies, holding cubs that were not her own, had asked for nothing but rest. "You will sleep," said, "and we will guard you, this I promise." She stood and gave orders in her own language. The warriors moved immediately, setting up a perimeter around the shelter. Some went a hunt for food. Others began building a proper camp. The cubs curled around, familiar and warm, laid his head on her stomach, pressed against her back, burrowed under her arm. For the first time in 4 days, closed her eyes without fear. The cubs slept beside the human. The elite guard stood watch around her broken ship. And somehow, impossibly, was safe. 3 weeks passed on Prime. The transformed everything. The broken escape pod became a proper shelter, reinforced with alien engineering, waterproof and warm. Hunters brought fresh meat every day, more than could ever eat. Healers treated her wounds with advanced medicine that worked faster than anything human doctors had. The fever that had been building in her body disappeared within days. Grew stronger, her wounds healed. The hunger that had eaten at her stomach faded. For the first time since the crash, she felt like herself again. But she was not alone anymore. Commander stayed by her side almost constantly. The massive warrior, who had conquered worlds and killed hundreds in battle, now spent her days making sure one small human had everything she needed. She brought food personally. She checked her wounds every morning. She asked questions about human customs and listened carefully to the answers. The other warriors followed her example. They treated with respect that confused her at first. They called her Pack Mother, a title she did not fully understand. They lowered their heads when she walked past. They made sure she was comfortable, warm, fed, and protected at all times. The cubs grew fast, and were already larger than they had been when found them. Children grew quickly, and with proper food and care, they were becoming strong and healthy. But they never forgot who had saved them during the storm. Every night they slept beside. Every morning they woke her with excited barks and playful nips. They followed her everywhere, learning to walk in formation behind her like tiny soldiers. When sat down to rest, they piled into her lap, regardless of how big they were getting. Taught them things. She showed them human games, clapping patterns and counting songs that her grandmother had taught her. She sang to them in Korean old lullabies about mountains and rivers and home. The cubs did not understand the words, but they loved the sounds. They would sit perfectly still whenever she sang, their amber eyes wide and focused. The warriors watched these moments with interest. They had never seen anything like it. A human woman teaching cubs to play human games. Cubs following a human woman like she was their birth mother. Two species that should have been enemies becoming family instead. On the 21st day, The rescue ship arrived. Captain of the Morning Star had received the emergency beacon signal 2 weeks earlier. The journey to Prime was long and dangerous, through regions of space where pirates hunted and lawlessness ruled. When he finally reached the forest moon, he expected to find a body. Instead, he found a camp full of warriors. His ship landed in a clearing that they had prepared. The Morning Star was a mid-sized rescue vessel capable of carrying 20 passengers and crew. Had brought 5 crew members with him, all armed, all nervous. When the loading ramp lowered, stepped out with his hands visible, showing he meant no harm. His eyes scanned the clearing, counting warriors. 20, 30, 40, more than 40 warriors, all armed, all watching him with those glowing amber eyes. His heart pounded. This was supposed to be a simple rescue mission. Find the survivor, bring them home. Nobody had mentioned anything about the... Then he saw her. A small Korean woman walked through the crowd of warriors like she owned the place. She was smiling, looking healthy and relaxed. 3 large cubs walked beside her, matching her pace, occasionally bumping against her legs like oversized puppies. Commander walked behind her, massive and terrifying, watching everything with protective eyes. Did not know what to say. His mouth opened but no words came out. Reached the bottom of the loading ramp and looked up at him. Her smile was warm and slightly embarrassed. "Captain," she asked. "Yes," he managed. "Captain Park." "That is me. I am very glad to see you." She said this while 3 alien predators circled her legs and 40 warriors watched from behind. Had so many questions that he could not pick which one to ask first. Before he could speak, Commander stepped forward. She towered over both humans, her face unreadable. "You are here for the Pack Mother," stated. It was not a question. Blinked. "Pack Mother." Sighed. "It is a long story. I will explain on the ship." Moved closer and crew raised their weapons automatically. The warriors behind her shifted, ready to fight. For a terrible moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then spoke and everything changed. "She will not travel alone." Frowned. "I am sorry. She is Pack Mother to 3 cubs of the... She is Pack Sister to the elite guard. She carries debts that will take generations to repay." Amber eyes burned with intensity. "Where she goes, we follow. This is not negotiable." Behind her, 40 warriors shifted into escort formation around position. They moved as one unit, perfectly coordinated, surrounding the small human woman in a protective shell. Looked at, shrugged helplessly. "I tried to tell them I would be fine," she said. "They are very protective." Now the size of a large dog, pressed against leg and growled at, and joined him, creating a wall of fur and teeth between their Pack Mother and this unknown human. Slowly lowered his weapon. His crew followed his example. "Captain," one of his crew members whispered, "what do we do?" What could he do? Refuse the fight 40 of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy? Tell them they could not come and risk starting a war? Or accept the situation and figure out the details later? Was a practical man. He had been a rescue captain for 15 years. He had seen strange things, unexpected things, impossible things. This was just one more impossible thing to add to the list. "How many of you are coming?" he asked. "All of us, the full escort." "I do not have room for 40 passengers." "Considered this. We will bring our own ships. We ask only that you allow us to fly beside you, to guard the Pack Mother during the journey home." Thought about arriving at Earth Space Station with 40 warships as escorts. He thought about the panic this would cause, the questions, the political chaos. Then he looked at the cubs pressed against her, at the peace on her face despite everything she had been through. "Fine," he said. "Welcome aboard, Captain Park, and your family." Smiled at him, a real smile full of relief and gratitude. Behind her, the cubs barked happily. Commander nodded with approval. The warriors began preparing for departure. walked back up the loading ramp, shaking his head. His superiors were going to have a lot of questions. He had no idea how to answer any of them. The story spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. News networks on every planet carried the images. A small human woman walking off a rescue ship, surrounded by warriors. 3 alien cubs following her like shadows. Commander, the most feared military leader in the Outer Rim, standing at her shoulder like a personal bodyguard. Nobody could believe it at first. There were conquerors. There were killers. They had destroyed colonies and crushed rebellions and showed mercy to no one. Yet here they were, escorting a human freighter captain like she was royalty. Politicians demanded explanations. Military commanders wanted briefings. Scientists requested interviews. Everyone had questions and everyone wanted answers. Gave them nothing. She was tired of being stared at, tired of being questioned, tired of being treated like a curiosity instead of a person. All she wanted was to go home, to see Earth again, to rest in a place where everything was familiar and safe. They came with her. This was not what anyone expected. When announced that the elite guard would be establishing a permanent residence on Earth, the human government nearly panicked. Ships entering Earth orbit, warriors walking Earth streets. It was unthinkable. But was not asking permission. Where the Pack Mother lives, we live, she said to the human officials. This is our law, this is our way. You may accept this or you may try to stop us. Choose carefully. Nobody tried to stop them. 1 year later, everything had changed. Lived in a small house outside a quiet town in South Korea. The house had been modified to accommodate guests, with higher ceilings and stronger floors and doors wide enough for 8-foot warriors to pass through. A separate building on the property served as barracks for the rotating guard of warriors who refused to leave her unprotected. The cubs had grown fast, was now almost as tall as, all muscle and energy, still curious about everything, still getting into trouble. Had become calm and wise, watching over her siblings with the same protective instincts she once showed toward. Remained the gentle one, still wanting nothing more than to curl up beside his pack mother and sleep. They were no longer cubs. They were young adults, smart and strong and proud, but they still slept beside every night. They still followed her everywhere she went. They still called her pack mother in their own language, and she still called them her children in hers. Commander became something nobody expected. She applied for human citizenship, not for political reasons, but because she refused to be separated from her pack sister by legal boundaries. The paperwork took 6 months. When it was finally approved, she celebrated by learning to cook Korean food, which she was terrible at but kept trying anyway. The cubs became ambassadors without meaning to. Human children wanted to meet them. Human schools invited them to speak. Human families sent letters asking questions about culture, and answered everyone personally, building bridges between species one conversation at a time. Others came to visit. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to see the human who had earned a pack debt. Some came out of respect, wanting to meet the woman their warriors spoke of with such admiration. A few came out of suspicion, unable to believe that any human could be worthy of such honor. All of them left as believers. There was something about that explanation. She was not strong by standards. She was not fast or dangerous or impressive in any physical way. She was just a small woman with a quiet voice and a gentle heart. But she had done what stronger beings could not. She had reached 3 dying cubs in a storm when their own people could not find them. She had fought a predator with her bare hands rather than abandoned children who were not hers. She had starved herself to keep them fed, stayed awake for days to keep them safe, loved them when she had no reason to love. This was something they understood, not strength of body but strength of spirit, not the ability to kill but the willingness to sacrifice. Humans called it compassion. They had no word for it until they met. Now they used her name as the word. Reporters still came sometimes, asking the same questions they had asked at the beginning. What made humanity special? What did humans have that other species lacked? How had one person changed the relationship between two civilizations? Always gave the same answer. "We are not special," she said. "We are not stronger or smarter or better than anyone else. We are just stubborn." She would look at, now fully grown, resting his massive head in her lap while she scratched behind his ears. "When something small and scared needs help, we help, even when it is stupid, even when it is dangerous, even when everyone else says it is not our problem." Would press against her back, rumbling with contentment, would curl at her feet, already half asleep. "We are not the strongest, we are not the fastest, we are not the," would smile. "But we are the ones who stay, and sometimes that is enough." The cubs slept beside the human, they always would. The elite guard remained at her side, not as conquerors, not as servants, but as family. And across the galaxy, other species heard the story and wondered. If one human could change everything, what could all of humanity do? If compassion could turn enemies into family, what else was possible? They had conquered worlds with violence. Humanity offered something different, not weapons, not technology, not threats or demands or shows of force. Just stubborn, foolish, unbreakable love. And that in the end changed everything. Years later, when historians wrote about the relationship between humans, and they called it the Pack-Mother Accord, they analyzed the political implications, the economic effects, the shift in galactic power structures. But they had a simpler name for it. They called it the Storm Night, the night when a human woman opened her shelter to 3 dying cubs and became something more than human. The night when the galaxy learned what humanity really was. Not predators, not prey. Pack. Family. Home.